Hi everyone, how are you? My name is Paola Alvarado. I'm a former player and we are talking about football. We are so excited to have our special guest. Mike is for the amazing team, Portland Timbers and Portland Thorns. And we are very excited to have this conversation today.
And today we're talking about football within the U.S. So the U.S. has been around football for a very long time, even though it might not seem that way. The men have been to 4 World Cups, and the women have been to all FIFA World Cups, winning 4. So we're the reigning champions. Columbus is also the champions of the MLS. And the Thorns are the current Challenge Cup winners of the NWSL.
Okay, and well, to start this amazing conversation, I'm gonna say hi, Mike. Thank you for coming here. And we're gonna want to start this, like it's very interesting how CONCACAF near to like far to be like a difficult confederation or something like that. We are at the same, we are like a family. And before we are recording this podcast, we were talking about like Portland have a good connection with Costa Rica. And please tell me something about what is your passion, what is something that you love, and that connection that we have in CONCACAF.
Yeah, it's been a really remarkable couple decades for the sport in the CONCACAF region and certainly in the United States. On the men's side, Major League Soccer is now in its 27th season, and the growth of teams, the quality of play, the attendance growth, the relevance, the broadcast presence, it's been a remarkable trajectory for the men's game in a short 27 years. And obviously lots of growth still to happen and necessary, but the state of the game on the men's side, and I'll get to the women's side in a moment, is really exciting for all of us in the sport here in North America. And you see that throughout the CONCACAF region to a certain extent. I think some countries are ahead of others. On the women's side here in the States, we are, as many of your listeners may know, we are now in our 9th season in the NWSL, the National Women's Soccer League. And it's our team, the Thorns, one of the original members. And it's arguably the best women's league in the world. There's some great teams in other countries around the world, but top to bottom, it is incredibly competitive league. And the business of the NWSL is also growing really in an exciting fashion. We averaged before COVID 20,000 fans a game, which you just don't see much in women's football. And around our league, there's other success stories like that. Next year, there are teams coming in San Diego and Los Angeles. So the league will continue to grow. We just, Paola and Bradley and I were talking before the podcast began, but we just finished the WICC tournament that was held here in Portland last weekend. So we had Houston, who had won the Challenge Cup in the NWSL last year, Lyon, who's won so many European championships, Barcelona, who just came off a championship, playing a tournament that the Thorns prevailed, but it wasn't as much as who won, just the fact that it was a really relevant, meaningful competition broadcast here in the States on ESPN. And so it's not something you would necessarily have seen even 8 years ago. So all that said, it's a really, we're in the early days of soccer growth in our country and in the CONCACAF region. We're playing catch up in a lot of respects, but the last decade, 2 decades have been a really important and meaningful period for the sport.
How would you view the massive growth of the sport within grassroots going through the academy into kind of progressing through the American way of getting to the pro level compared to to Europe, where it's mostly going through the academy and then going straight in instead of going to college, and kind of building building like a support system within Portland and then within and around the US.
Yeah, Bradley, it's a great question. And for your listeners who may not be familiar with the sports environment here in the States, we are, the sport of soccer is competing for the best boys and girl athletes with so many other major sports, NBA, NFL, NHL, et cetera. So the competitive landscape for professional sports in our country is arguably unique. And so we have to, as a sport, both on the boys and girls side, capture the young athletes at an early age. And historically, as you point out, in Europe, that's been done in the academy. In the States, much like the NBA and the NFL, historically, it's been players come up through their respective clubs and high schools, go to college, and then get drafted into the league. And that's still on the women's side, still very much the path. Most of the best players in our country come through collegiate programs, and the college program on the women's side is at a very high level. But that's starting to change, to your question. MLS clubs and NWSL clubs have academies, some very long-standing, some relatively new. And we are seeing, as you might imagine, that's not an instant thing, right? It takes time for players to develop, to identify players, but it's really starting to pay dividends. You see that on the men's side. There's some clubs like Dallas and Philadelphia and others who've been very successful at developing players through their system. And Busio was just sold to a La Liga team. A Serie A team last month, who came up through the Sporting KC academy and system. And so that is happening more and more. Again, the women's side is a little bit behind, but we have a player, Olivia Moultrie. Maybe some of your listeners have heard about her, but she was signed a letter of intent to play at the University of North Carolina at age 13, opted to instead turn pro and sign a deal with Nike. Came to our academy and through our academy, again at age 13. And she is now on the first team with the Thorns and playing and scoring in the WICC and has the potential to be a really meaningful player for our sport for a long time. And so those kind of success stories and player paths, I think you'll see more and more as our teams invest more and more in the academies.
And Mike, you say different things that it's impressive for me, like a former player. I'm a physical educator, and also I have a master in leadership. So I have two backgrounds, right? The first one, like a teacher, like a coach, like a person who improved all these people to go inside the sports. And I also have the background like a former player when 10 years ago or 15 years ago, United States was amazing in girls and boys, I can say, like a national team, right? But maybe like a league, it was like behind thinking about Europe, right? Always thinking with Central America, they always are like one step from us, just thinking about infrastructure. Like we talked the last podcast, we need some changes here in Central America, or money or support, also people. We have a few options to have a good sports in our countries, right? Because we are a few. Uh, but one of the things, like a former player, that is impressive for me is that jump that you had in 10 years. 10 years ago, I can say like, oh, I want to go and study in the college. And maybe for us, it was like, oh, it's not a good option. But right now is the option. Right now, it's the jump to be a professional, to have the college, to have this opportunity to jump to this, like, for example, uh, Thorns or any soccer team in the United States. So how do you think like that jump was so strong and so sustainable that it's like a project and it's a business for the future?
Yeah, Paul, it's a great question. And, you know, I think we all understand is that for the sport of soccer to flourish anywhere, it has to be in lockstep with the realities of economics. And in the case of women's soccer in our country, as you may know, we've had 2 failed leagues prior to the NWSL launching in 2013. And while there are many variables, in the end, it was the economics, underlying economics of the league were just not sustainable. And so if we all want to provide a path for young women to play professional soccer and play at the highest levels, we've got to create an economic model, a league, and an economic model that's sustainable. And what that requires are, first of all, owners that care about the future of the sport and are willing to invest, and in many cases willing to absorb early losses for financial losses for a while as the league develops. It requires all of us investing in the right facilities for academies, but also the first team, stadium, and training grounds. And that element has really come a long way in our country, again, in the last decade, 15 years, both on the men's and women's side. But the facility piece is a huge component of it. And so, current NWSL players, they understand, most of them, that what they're doing is paving the way for future generations of players. And while, and the hope is, much like MLS players 20 years ago weren't earning what current players are earning, that will be the case, we all hope, 20 years from now in the NWSL. And so it's a journey, but I think we all have to be realistic about the making sure that financial and economic model is viable, because without that, then the opportunity for women today and in future years won't be possible. And that's really been the difference, Paola, of this iteration of women's professional soccer in the NWSL. We've got a long way to go, and it's not been, it's been challenging at times, but we also are on sort of the most stable ground that any women's professional soccer league has been, and that's exciting. So, and great question.
Before Bradley say the next comment, I really, really love that you say that, because sometimes people really want it, like, do that jump in one day, right? And it's like a process. You cannot start giving everything and you don't know what is going to happen tomorrow. But if you go like slow and stronger, that it's going to be a good business, like at the end, that it's something that I'm really understand right now. It's like soccer, football, or any sport, it's a real business, and you have to take care for that.
Right.
When you look at the MLS and the NWSL, like, I guess from an outsider's perspective, if you're not from either the US or parts of North America who understand the league, I guess they don't they see it as more of a like a retirement league because of the roster rules in place. How do you change? I mean, it clearly isn't, because the rules are there in place to keep it economically viable and not overspending and making teams go broke and having the league collapse. How do you kind of change the perception of both of the league, of the MLS, and then for the NWSL, kind of how they're growing? I mean, from having no teams in California to having two next year. How's that changing the audience within the NWSL?
Bradley, when you say perception from whom?
Perception of an outsider's perspective. So let's say like Europe.
Yeah, I think Paola is right that it's not an overnight thing. It's not flipping a switch. It's doing what we do here in Portland and put 20,000 fans a game. That gets a lot of attention around the world. It's us beating, Lyon, one of the best teams in the world, in a match. It's going to major markets with exciting new expansion teams like we'll see next year with LA and San Diego, like we saw this year with Louisville. It's continue to produce, the amazing national teams. And by the way, we haven't talked about that, but one of the major reasons why it's important to have a really successful domestic league, I think everybody understands, is that it bolsters your national team. And the U.S. national team, while disappointing the Olympics, is still arguably the best national team in the world. And but that gap is closing, and the gap is closing in part because other countries and other federations around the world are investing in their domestic leagues, and so we have to continue to do the same to stay a dominant national team. So there's no panacea or instant formula, Bradley. It's just continue to do all the right things, put the best product on the field that we can, and we think we're really proud of the quality of the women's game in the NWSL. Putting great events on in great stadium and drawing increasingly large crowds, which in large part we've done. It's having really great national broadcasts and international broadcast partners, which the NWSL has done and is doing. So our games are on Twitch throughout the world and getting really good audiences, and on CBS and their family of stations networks here in the States. And so it's doing all the right things on an ongoing day-to-day basis and chipping away. And but the fundamentals are high quality product on the field in great facilities and really strong fan bases and really great media coverage. And if we do all those things in concert, then it will continue to grow.
Yeah, I think just watching Portland, both the Timbers and the Thorns every weekend, is it definitely comes across as probably for the Thorns specifically, probably the best atmosphere and viewing for women's football around the world, just because the fan base is there. You hear them, you see them, and the being in the stadium is unlike anything else. So yeah.
And trying to connect this with my son, the next comment that I had, it was about like what things it's different about the other teams in the league. And I think you too are saying like being different, the fan base that you had, again, it's a business, right? And you have to have your people who is following you have to be happy. And I'm gonna put like a little example that how you can connect with people around the world like for example, Ronnie Wallace, the last week, I think, he retired for soccer. And maybe for another person it's not important, but for Costa Rican, it was like a thing, like, oh my God, they hired Rodney Wallace for one day, and he had this environment for him. So for Costa Rican, it's important, right? So people like us or people around the world can see that little details that maybe people who is not inside the soccer don't understand, but people who love the game understand that things make the difference. Uh, it's not about Portland and Timbers or Thorns, but for example, one of these amazing players from United States, Donovan, say like, go and play in Ricardo Saprissa is one of the worst days of my life. And maybe Costa Rica wasn't a good team in that moment, but that experience, it's in the head of him, and that thing plays. So for example, now, if you say Timbers or Thorns, you already know that you have experience, and you have to be prepared, not just because you're gonna play. It's because you have to go, you have the fan base very strong, you know, like if they score, they're gonna celebrate. So who was the person, or why Portland is doing this? I know like you make things for a reason, but when you understand like this, it's more than 11 people running with the ball.
Yeah, it's that's right. I think that's well said, Paola. I think, listen, we're in the business of just bringing people together and creating moments and memories and community. And I think you can never lose sight of the fact that we're all in this to touch lives and maybe make people's lives a little bit better or more enjoyable, or break down some of the walls that seem to exist in our society. And so, we're a business made up of humans and our fans, our players, and we should never lose sight of that, and always treat people with the kind of respect and dignity and grace that we want them back. And if that's the culture around your team, in the locker room and in the stands and in the community, then you're going to be successful. And so that's always been kind of our mantra and the way we went about doing it. And so the Rodney example that you illustrated, Rodney Wallace retiring, it was just such a obvious, natural thing, because he was one of us, is one of us. And even though he left the organization for a while, he was, always part of the family. And so this was just a natural thing. And, for him and his family and for our fans, it was just one of those really special moments, just recognizing someone who was a big part of what we did. And it was just really awesome. And that's what sports can do. It can create those moments. It wasn't about a game or results. It was just about, recognizing a person for his contribution and his history and his legacy here. And it was awesome. And so that wasn't just a natural outgrowth, I think, of who we are as a club.
When you're thinking of, when you think of Portland, you always think of Soccer City. How did you build that brand for the team, and how is it kind of stuck for the city?
Yeah, we were lucky in that the Timbers were really first born in 1975, when there was a league that formed called the North American Soccer League. And the Timbers were really successful then. And a lot of the original players stayed in Portland long after the league folded, and started soccer clubs and coached at the local university. And so we had this soccer culture that dated back nearly like 35 years before the Timbers of MLS joined. So we have the history and that backdrop and that foundation of a soccer culture. But I think it was just, it was and continues to be just a matter of being a part of the the fabric of the community, and letting those soccer supporters who eat, breathe, drink, and tattoo the Timbers and Thorns be who they are, and there's no better marketing and no better ambassadors for our club than our supporters. And they're out there in the community supporting us every day, and we want to give them voice, hear their voice, and have them inform our decisions, but also give them voice in defining who the club is. And so that, it's not us dictating or engineering or fabricating this. It's us creating the environment and the conditions and the backdrop, if you will, for fans to become, to do their thing. And so that's a big part of our brand is it's defined by our supporters and our community, and not a top-down way of thinking.
And one of my last questions or comments or listen to you is like, I believe that the process, they are good, and do projects always have some good results. How, thinking that I want to learn about the best people around the football, and I want to change my environment or help the game, how you have this family to believe in the same project. And I'm gonna do an example. Maybe we are thinking like people are not supporting the women's football, but it's not because the business is not playing. It's just because the soccer players don't believe that this can be a thing. How can I explain this better? Maybe my company, I'm gonna do this example, really want to invest in girls, but the girls don't want to be professional. It's not because they don't want to be professional, it's because they never been professional. So how you can change that, or how you can help that process, that, okay, I'm gonna invest in you, but now you have to be professional with me. How you can do that change when in some leagues, for example, here in Costa Rica, have a lot of years and we cannot do that jump?
Yeah, it's a loaded question, Paola, and there's no easy answers. It's just you've got to just get champions at every level, on the youth level, the recreation level, on the club level, on the professional level. You've got to get champions, and people, change comes from inspiration and leadership, but also a lot of hard work. And we've got to all find people who so believe in the game and the future of the game, and our players and our fans. And you're, for someone so young, you're very wise to understand that as much as we'd like to kind of blink our eyes and wake up tomorrow morning and have the state of football and women's football be dramatically different than it is today, it's unrealistic. But as I described at the top of the podcast, it is realistic to think that in 10 years, and we've seen this in the NWSL and the MLS, in 10 years, that big change can happen. But you got to have the champions. You've got to pay people believe, people putting their money where their mouth is, and also tell our stories and celebrate the successes, right? There's no better agent for change than bringing someone to their first game and seeing and having them experience it. If someone came to the WICC final on Sunday for the first time and that was their first exposure to women's football, I think they would have been changed. And so the more we can expose people to the joy and beauty and enjoyment of football, women's football in particular, the more likely they're going to be advocates and champions, investors and supporters. And so we've just got to keep getting and we've got to do it. I do, and that's why CONCACAF is important and FIFA is important. We've got to do that on a global basis, and and to help tell each other stories. And there isn't a women's club championship. That and what we played in is basically that, but there isn't a FIFA World Cup of clubs, and so we just got to keep pushing, keep advocating. Even what you guys are doing, telling the story and studying it and doing podcasts, and you two are from different countries and you've come together, and that adds up. That's all part of the equation. So it's got to be it's a mission-based thing for all of us in the business, and the more people we can kind of get on board on the train, the better. And it is exciting to know that here in the States and throughout the world, for that matter, the state of football and women's football in particular is dramatically different and better than it was just a decade ago. And if we keep doing what we're doing together, that we could say the same thing 10 years from now.
And that is very impressive. And we already have like the time to do the close, and Bradley and I, we love to close always the podcast because we say like we want to change the future for the business for a good way, but we cannot do that if we don't have a reflection about it. So we always love to do two things. It's like say what you can save about this conversation and what we want to do like in the future to change that. So Bradley, do you want to do the honors to start, and then Mike, and then?
Sure. Yeah. I like what we were saying before. I mean, probably building champions is a massive thing, and kind of leaning into the stories of everyone else, along with kind of like we just touched upon with kind of building internationally too, because it's not going to be a foothold, especially women's football, around the world if not everyone embraces it. So I think for me, when I see the start of like a women's club World Cup and the CONCACAF Champions League for women, I think that it'll be a massive step up for the game, but also economically, you can't take a massive leap without having the idea of what you're actually doing, and you need to understand how to keep it sustainable, whether it be on the men's or women's side of the game.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Yeah, and well, for me, I really love that the words that you said. You have to have like leadership in your organization. You have to have like inspired your team. And one of the things that I love it was like at the end we are like a family. Is one of us. So you have identity, right? That it's different play or work in a place that that you love, or a place that you have just because I have to work or play. So, and you see it, right? In social media, you see the girls and you see the boys and you see all together. So I really love to know that football is not just the game, it's more than that. And I think that is the reason that Bradley and I want to search all this conversation with people like you that really love the process, really love the game, and really at the end, they really love the business of or passion. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We really
thank you guys. I enjoyed the conversation. Look forward to talking to you all soon. Take care.
So remember, listen us in Tika and Gringo talking about football in all our platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. That was an amazing episode.